Today is Monday, July 7th, 2025. This is First Alert Weather Plus. Meteorologist Nicholas Snider here. Lots to talk about on today's episode. Of course, happy 4th of July, belated 4th of July to a lot of us. Hopefully you had a fantastic Independence Day weekend. Got a lot to talk about, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, the three big things we are looking at. We need to talk about, of course, the new heat wave being here. We're talking about the weekend, of course, seeing a lot of that heat wave activity. We're also going to give you a fair season preview here. And, of course, we're going to talk if any cool down is in sight. Of course, we want to see that cool down because we just haven't seen a whole lot of that. So let's get right into what we are talking about here. Of course, we're going to begin with this ongoing heat wave. The good news is we have this front right here, thanks to this little dip in the jet stream. In fact, I'll zoom out on this to see most of this heat wave is now actually off to our east, out here in the Atlantic. That's some good news. So there is some relief that will be on the way coming once this front does get here. And in fact, this front will drive a few storms. That's another thing, of course, we'll have to talk about here on First Alert Weather Plus, is this front coming on through. And I'll clear this off for you, and we'll kind of animate this moving forward. The good news is we're actually going to enter into a cooler pattern. That jet stream is going to want to kind of stay to our south, at least until we head into the weekend. Looks like another little system will be headed our way down here, coming into the Midwest, and that will be something we have to watch going into next week. Of course, that's the European model. We got to look at the American model, too. Keep in mind, the American model, as of late, has had some trouble because it has not really been performing all that great thanks to lack of data. So that will be something to keep in mind. We've been skewing toward the European model, at least in the long term as of late. But again, you'll see in the American model this little front coming on through right here. This is, of course, midnight tonight. And we take that front off, and we'll put this in motion. Cooler pattern sets in store for a while. And the American model keeps us in this cooler pattern for quite a bit, whereas the European model keeps us in a little bit of a warmer pattern for a little bit longer, at least into the weekend. But overall, some relief is on the way. We've seen tons of those 90s. Of course, this past weekend into the mid-90s. Today, even into the mid-90s. We're starting to see those storms work in, and that will help kind of cool things down just a little bit for the rest of your week, at least before the weekend here. All right, back to our weather graphics. We are talking about the temperatures. The heat wave is coming to an end, like I mentioned earlier, and that's, of course, something we all want to see here. Here's the temperatures, again, for the rest of your night. We're in the 80s. We fall back into the low 80s for your day Tuesday. Again, this is the European model. American model will look a little different than this. Upper 80s, lower 90s for Wednesday, out ahead of another system. And then back into the 70s and 80s by Thursday, back into those upper 80s Friday, and then in maybe to those 90s. Again, the European model has that more of a hotter pattern for the weekend. So really dependent upon exactly what this front does in terms of what we could see going into the weekend. Of course, the American model might be a little bit cooler for the weekend. And in fact, it is looking likely that that's going to be the case. First and foremost, though, we have to check, of course, those feels-like temperatures. And yes, we're adding humidity to the atmosphere. So, yeah, you saw those upper 80s for those feels-like temperatures on Tuesday. When you add that humidity, that's going to be the case. Back into those 90s here. And then a little bit of a break by Friday, according to the European model. And then right back into those mid-90s. In fact, I'll scroll that back for you so you can see. Look at that 92-degree feels-like temperature by the time we head into Saturday. Not great. Same thing on Sunday. So, again, the heat will be somewhat back as we head into the weekend, and that won't feel all that great, according to the European model. Now let's go into the American model here, give you an idea there. This is a little different. It's got the same general theme, though, early on. Again, into the low 80s for your day tomorrow, back into the 90s briefly for Wednesday. Then we start a cooler pattern Thursday, Friday, and it remains cooler on the American model heading into the weekend. And my apologies for the pauses. It looks like we're a little delayed here, but you get the idea. You saw a glimpse of those 90s. Feels like temperatures, adding humidity to the air. Again, 95 into the mid-90s also for tomorrow. So the American model wanting to put a little bit more humidity in that air. And then we get that break for the weekend, and even into the weekend on the American model, we'll see that. Again, as of late, the European model has been the hot hand, so we're going to kind of skew toward that. But ultimately, we'll have to see what happens this weekend, and it really depends on what happens with this front. And that's going to be, of course, a very, very interesting thing. By the way, this past weekend, we did not see a whole lot in terms of excessively hot, feels like temperatures, and that's because we just didn't have a whole lot of humidity in the air. Meteorologist Brandon Butcher has a little explainer on that, and he's got you covered right here.
So let's talk about the heat index. Let's explain it in a little more detail. First, we're going to be talking about the human body. The human body likes to be at 98.6 degrees or thereabouts. That's the normal human temperature. Usually when internally it gets a little hot, you start talking about fevers and the like. Well, the sunshine can play a role at that too. So when it starts to get hot on your skin, remember, direct sunlight makes it a lot hotter than what the thermometer might say, and your body in response will start to sweat. And what does that do? Well, it starts to put water on the surface of your skin, and that interacts with the air right next to it, and that cooling process is that heat leaving your body when you are able to perspire. So as long as the humidity in the air is low, the water can actually get into the air, resulting in heat going that way and cooler air coming to your skin, kind of like the way wind chill would affect your body, except that perspiration allows that to happen. Now, the problem is when you get a ton of humidity in the air already, that air becomes saturated and that sweat process is no longer able to happen. Well, you sweat, but it does not cool. That sweat doesn't leave your body, so instead you just continue to get hotter and hotter, and you perspire more, which can lead to dehydration, and that's why we talk about the need to stay hydrated on hot days, especially when the humidity is high, to avoid those consequences of heat exhaustion or worse, even heat stroke. So 90-degree days on their own may not be as dangerous, all depending on the amount of humidity in the air. The higher the humidity, the more dangerous it is, and the hotter it feels, because your body would respond differently to a dry temperature of 100 degrees versus when it's 95 with high humidity and it feels like 100 degrees. Same amount of sweat there, but your body would at least have more success trying to bring your temperature down when you have the lower humidity setting. So let's try to be safe when those high humidity days arrive.
Great explainer there, Brandon. And yes, again, we've been talking about, of course, those heat indices and how important they are for really determining when it is safe to be outside versus when it's not safe to be outside. Now let's talk about, of course, what's going on this week, the upper atmosphere, the technical information that we need to look at. And, of course, we've been looking closely at this trough. Again, this area of low pressure aloft that has really just driven in some of these storms that we are going to be watching later this evening and into tonight. Of course, this is tomorrow night. Notice most of this activity, in fact, I'll clear the red circle off here. Most of this activity is now located off to the east, where that wiggle in the white lines is right in there. You see that wiggle kind of right along this axis is where we've been talking about most of that activity. So a bit of a break headed our way for the day Wednesday. But we're going to set this in motion here, and you'll see what's headed our way beyond this. Let me clear that map off for you so you can see. There you go. We've got some more activity further to the west on Wednesday, and most of the energy confined to areas further to the south. And we've got a rush of this cooler air coming in from the north. Remember where these lower dips in these white lines are right here indicates that cooler air. So that cooler air is filtering down right in here. Meanwhile, we've got the warm air to the south, the downright hot air even, and that's pushing up here. So right along that piece of energy that I have circled right in here is where we're going to have to watch for the development of some showers and storms here for the rest of the week, as that front is just going to be stalled out to our south right here. Let's clear off the map, and we'll show you what I mean. A lot of this energy, again, confined to the south, especially for Wednesday and Thursday here, and there's the main batch of that energy coming through on Thursday. Could have some good soakers further to the south of I-64, but a lot of us in southern Ohio remain dry. We're seeing converging air. Again, I'll annotate that for you. We got wind coming up from the south here and a strong wind coming to the north here. Converging air means, of course, high pressure. So much of Ohio, right in this general area, should be A-OK. Not going to see a whole lot in terms of really high activity and really anything too bad here for your day on Thursday. So Lawrence County, Ohio Fair, not looking too bad. Again, let's move this in motion once again. Maybe a little bit more of that energy exiting on Friday. So Friday not looking too bad. And then once we head into the weekend, at least according to the European model, we could see a new area of low pressure right in here with this energy that is back here. And that'll be something we're watching. Let's go to the American model again. This hasn't been the very hot hand as of late, but we'll get an idea of what it's showing. Again, most of that energy coming tomorrow further to the south, right in here. And that's going to move this general direction south of the I-64 corridor. Clear that off for you. By Wednesday into Thursday, here it is. And here's the axis of really the higher upward motion right in there. And, of course, the hotness of the air, the higher temperature air is going to be further to the south. So the more unstable air further to the south here of that I-64 corridor down here. So those soakers will be more likely, again, heading into Wednesday into Thursday further to the south. And then it looks like, according to the American model, this is where those diverging kind of data-driven things are. We could get a little bit of a break as opposed to the European model, which has this piece of energy back here a little bit further ahead, giving us, of course, more of that activity. We'll have to see ultimately what happens. Again, it's very dependent upon what this front actually does and how it impacts later stuff that will be headed down the way and headed on our horizon here. So some pretty interesting things for sure showing up. Let's talk about a Futurecast. Of course, the Futurecast, we're going to show the European model for this because that has been the hot hand as of late, like I mentioned earlier. Tuesday, a lot of this activity clearing out. Could still see some residual thunderstorms here with that energy kind of moving away. Remember, Tuesday is when that energy, at least for the most part, is off to the east before that next batch back to the west begins to move on in. And you'll see Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, most of the activity further to the south before we get that surge of new activity. Again, this is the European model coming in. The American model will have a little bit less in terms of rain in the long term right here. So again, we'll just have to see what plays out. And I do believe the European model, again, has had the hot hand as of late. So it'll have kind of a better bet at what's going on and a better feel of what's going on in our atmosphere. County fair season is officially on. And Chief Meteorologist Tony Cavalier, he stopped by the studio to give us a little preview of what we can expect. So we're here with Tony Cavalier to preview, of course, county fair season. And like we say always, Tony knows about every event going on. And this week, of course, we kick things off with the Lawrence County, Ohio Fair. So first, let's talk about that fair, Tony. What do people have to look forward to over there in Proctorville?
The thing I always have recalled, my first fair was in the Cabell County Fair, the Lawrence County Fair back in 1988. But over in Lawrence County Fair, the old-timers come up to me, "Hey, Tony, it always rains. It's always hot at the fair." Well, let's see now. The calendar has it's July. It's one of the wettest months of the year, and it's one of the hottest months of the year. So it's supposed to be hot and dry, right? And certainly that's in the forecast this week.
Gotcha. And again, Demolition Derby night is Tuesday night, tomorrow night. What's some of the best things we can see from that?
Well, I'll tell you what, they come in from 5 and 6 states, especially for the Saturday night at the end of the fair event. I think Monday night tonight is called the Maniac Monday, where they come in from. There'll be 3 or 4 states that are represented, and there's big stakes. When the more states that are represented, you know, the bigger the payout. So these guys are in it. They're in it to win it. And there's some big prizes that are on the line for the ones who can survive the dirt pit. They'll hose down the dirt pit. They don't want you going too fast. So if we're in a dry spell, they'll hose things down. So there's some mudslinging going on. And you got to back up. You can't go forward. So the funny thing I always like to ask the guys, you got insurance? And oddly, sometimes they don't. So these guys are really kind of riding by the seat of their pants.
And let's talk about, of course, the rest of the week. What do we have going on over there in Proctorville? And then we have another fair, I believe, coming up this Friday. So talk about that one as well.
Okay, well, basically over at the Lawrence County Fair, there's a mixture of music and sporting rides in the grandstand area. It's got one of the neatest county fair midways. And so from when you come in off of Proctorville, off of the Route 7, you see the big pig in the marquee, and he's inviting you to the Lawrence County Fair. And if you walk the county fair, there are always memories to be had. You cannot go to a county fair. When I used to take my goddaughter when she was young, we would always stop by the 4-H and the FFA area, where the animal shows are really the heart of the county fair across America, where kids in 4-H and FFA, Future Farmers of America, they basically devote their entire summers to showing their animal at the fair. And no matter how hot it is inside the Premier Management Show Arena, there will be a big crowd and an enthusiastic crowd rooting like it's the Super Bowl for their favorites in order to bring home the coveted blue ribbon. And so I always make sure, whatever county fairs I go to, I make sure that I stop, number one, at the show arena and catch whatever show's going on. And we go, whether it be from steer to pigs to goats. We've got all sorts of 4-H and FFA events going on all week long.
And you mentioned Putnam County starts Friday as well. So what's the biggest thing to watch for at Putnam County? You've been there a lot.
I want you to look on the marquee on the interstate or on the off-roads, and it says, always the second weekend in July. So they want you to know, going forward, it's always going to be. And they have a 2-weekend run from the weekend, another bookend weekend, and in between, lots of events. Of course, Demolition Derby, of course, rodeo, and rides to die for the kids. It was a couple years ago when I interviewed the Rhinestone Cowboy from where you worked. Maybe you heard of him, from Idaho, and he came in and did a marvelous show on just the type of events that county fairs are known for, the unpredictable, where he literally was a magician. He had his wife and he had his daughter, and I swear I don't know how he threw those knives and just missed her skull, but he did. And if you were to Google that at WSAZ.com and put out the Rhinestone Roper at the WSAZ Putnam County Fair, you'll be able to see the story I did with there. And I just don't know what new thrill will be had at the Putnam County Fair, because they always bring somebody in special during the course of the week.
Now let's talk about, of course, the rest of the festivities going on. What can we look forward to, not just at Lawrence County, Ohio, Putnam County, but what are some of the other county fairs that people would love to go to and should check out around here?
It's a cavalcade of county fairs that once they get going, they come at you in waves. And so as we get to the end of January, end of July, we wish it was January weather, right? End of July into August, of course, we'll make our way up to across from the Holzer Medical Center for the Gallia County Junior Fair. And we've got the Jackson Fair, which is going on in Wellston, so it's the far northern part of the county, pretty much just off of the Bob Evans Highway. And the Meigs County Fair concludes the season. I call it the granddaddy of them all. That's the Scioto County Fair. It dates back to the 1850s. And there, the parade of 4-H'ers and kids in FFA on the Monday night is just something to behold. They parade through the fairgrounds, a couple hundred strong, because there is an extremely strong agricultural route in Scioto County, as there are in many other counties. In Kentucky, the Boyd County Fair is near the end of August, so it's always as the kids are going back to school. Greenup County Fair is right around Labor Day. The Lawrence County Fair in Kentucky is a small one, but it does occur as we get to early August. In West Virginia, we talked about Putnam. Don't forget about the Cabell County Fair out in Milton at Pumpkin Park. That'll be coming on at the end of the month of July, and also events going on. For example, the county fair season actually started a couple weeks ago. It's not a county fair. It's known as the Magnolia Fair down in Matewan in Mingo County, but it's sort of a county fair, and you get the idea. If there is a county you live in, there's going to be a fair. The Mason County Fair, I haven't been able to get to in a few years, and that really makes me unhappy because it's one of my favorites. Up State Route 2, just north of the Armory. You see that big tank on Route 2 near the Armory. Just go up a couple more miles. And the Mason County Fair is a really neat one, very well run and very well attended.
And one last quick question for you right here. What's some of the craziest weather you've ever experienced at some of these places?
Happened 2 summers ago up at the Jackson Fair, where we were in a storm pattern. I happened to be caught off guard up there in that storms were moving in. I went to the fair anyway, and of course I had good backdrop here. We had Andy and you, Nicholas, were on that night, as I recall. And that was the night there were tornado warnings. And I can remember the story I did that night was what happens. We didn't go storm chasing that day. The storm came chasing us over the Jackson Fair and shut things down because of all the lightning. But, you know, when it gets hot and humid, and this year it's unlike last year when it was hot and dry. This year it's hot and humid, which means we're always going to have to worry about those evening thunderstorms trying to play havoc with your favorite county fair venue.
Great. Well, thanks, Tony, for stopping by once again. All right, thank you, Tony. And, of course, what could the weather look like at that Lawrence County, Ohio Fair? And, of course, what's your forecast for tomorrow? Well, I've got you covered on that in your super zone-by-zone forecast. All right, here's a look at your zone-by-zone forecast for your Tuesday. Not at all bad. Temperatures middle and upper 80s with that cold front coming through right now. Should not be a bad day. We will see some lingering storms in the morning, but I think for the afternoon, if you're headed down to Proctorville for the Lawrence County Fair, should be looking A-OK toward that evening time frame. Again, around noontime, a few lingering storms could be a possibility, but those temperatures will drop from the upper 80s and lower 90s down into the 70s by the time that sun does set. So get out and about and enjoy it. Eastern Kentucky, we're looking at similar temperatures here, middle and upper 80s, a few lingering storms. Better chances will be in the coal fields during the day, and better chances will come in the morning. Northwest winds 5 to 10 miles an hour, and again, middle and upper 80s. Not too bad temperature-wise. Nice to get a break from the 90s that we saw all weekend, and of course, for your day today. Middle and upper 80s for southern West Virginia here. Lingering morning storms, especially near the Corridor G area from Williamson up through Logan to Madison. Northwest winds at 5 to 10 miles an hour. And eastern and central West Virginia, 87 in Charleston, 88 in Huntington. Storms will exit through the day, and by the evening time, we should be A-OK and very dry. All right, and so we're talking about, of course, all the things going on this week and things going on next week. You heard Tony mention the Putnam County Fair next week. Well, again, things are a little bit iffy in terms of what's going to happen in the long term. Let's go back to our weather graphics. We'll take a look at kind of our pattern that we're in. Again, we're getting that break from the heat wave. Remember, the heat is now off into the Atlantic. I know it was a hot day today, but trust me, this cold front that is coming through is going to bring us at least a little bit of relief as we head later on down the line. All that cold air, meanwhile, still remains bottled up in the Arctic Circle. That's what we call a positive Arctic oscillation. And we have cold air even into the Alaskan area right here, this little bay right up here. That's what we know as a positive Eastern Pacific oscillation. So not a whole lot in terms of cooler air, at least pattern-wise, overhead, at least for now. But let's set this map in motion right here. And you'll notice a nudge of some of the warmer temperatures further to the north. That is going to help kind of relieve this Arctic air from pushing on through before we get that next round of warmer conditions for this weekend. But a little push of some cooler air back here. Of course, if we really want the cooler air, we got to get that surge in from the North Atlantic and, of course, the Arctic Circle here. But our next system will bring in at least a little bit of relief from this activity. Again, we've seen this heat wave literally for much of the rest of this week, and then as we head into the weekend, possibly could see another warm-up in those temperatures right here. And that could be a case where we see those temperatures, again, surging back up into the 90s. But the good news is for the rest of this week, 80s are going to be a likelihood with less humidity, and we will take that. A little bit more rain further to the south, like I mentioned earlier on in the show. This is First Alert Plus. We air every Monday, 6:30 p.m., give you the latest info on what you need to know weather-wise for everything that could be headed your way. We track the latest, give you that first alert, and give you, of course, any technical information that you could need for all those weather geeks out there. We air on every digital platform WSAZ has to offer. That includes YouTube, that includes Facebook, anything you can. And, of course, as long as you're tuning in, you'll get that first alert. In the meantime, remember to like if you're watching on YouTube, keep tuning in on WSAZ.com, on the WSAZ app, and follow us all on Facebook to get us the latest information. In the meantime, make it a great Monday.